What's the meaning of life? It's service. It's service to others. Because when you give service to others, it actually makes you happier. So it actually helps you and it helps them. And if everyone is living in a service mindset, you are keeping your ego, the insistent self or Satan, in check. And if everyone was living in a service-oriented mindset, the world would transform. So that's what I would say to a young actor, student, someone, just like, how can you take what you do well, what you love, what ignites your heart, and turn it into service?
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Well, if you're a regular listener or watcher of the Midlife Chrysalis, you know that we have disrupted our pattern. Our pattern had been every week on Wednesday, we had an interview that we released. And now we're doing those on Monday and Friday. And so this is our first Friday episode. And on Wednesdays soon, we'll be doing a Wisdom Wednesday episode, all dedicated to me and Derek Gale, our CEO of MEA, talking about a particular topic around wisdom. With me doing my best to spout wisdom, but who knows? I'll do my best to make an interesting Wednesday for you. But so you'll look for those interviews on Monday and Friday. And Rainn Wilson is the person who's our Friday interview, and I wish I could invite him to my birthday party because today's my birthday. It's my 65th birthday. I'm having a party at the Phoenix Hotel, my very first hotel I started 39 years ago. It's on a long-term land lease. It's the end of the lease, and so it's a retirement party, not for me, but for my hotel. But Rainn is somebody that I love to converse with. There aren't that many people, famous stars, Dwight on from The Office, who have gone from being the fool to the philosopher. His podcast and book, Soul Boom, and his new book, which comes out next week, Soul Boom Workbook, are all about how we explore soul in our life, a topic that we love at MEA. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Wish me happy birthday. And if you're in the Bay Area, maybe even come to the Phoenix Hotel in the Tenderloin, at the gateway to the Tenderloin, for a party there starting at 7 o'clock tonight. Thanks so much. See ya on the other side of this episode when I do the outro and tell you what I learned from Rainn. Rainn Wilson, welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis.
Thanks, Chip. I love the title of your podcast and empire. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here. I even wore my favorite sweater, my soul sweater, just for you.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, for those of you on YouTube, you can see that I'm wearing a sweater that says soul on it. So let's talk about soul. Let's go to the deep end of the pool to start with. In reading your new book, which has just launched this week, I noticed that you talked about Paisley starships when you were talking about soul. So how do you define soul and what is a soul? And how did Dwight from The Office become such a philosopher?
That's my favorite introductory question I've ever had on a podcast. Thank you. So I have this podcast called Soul Boom, based on the book Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And every episode, I ask the guests, what is soul? What is your definition of soul? And I have such a specific idea of what soul is, but you'd be surprised at the range, depth, complexity, and nuance of people defining the word soul. It is really jaw-dropping. To some people, it's like artistic expression, almost like soul music. Other people, it's like it's a feeling. Other people, it's like a connection of you get to nature or the world or something that you love. For me, the soul is the human part of us, the eternally human part of us, the kind of miracle of consciousness that continues after our, physical stint on this world draws to an end. And the reason that there's a Paisley starship included in that question is I remember as a kid, I grew up a member of the Baha'i faith and, asking my parents, like, "What is a soul? What does this mean?" Like, this idea, like, the soul continues after the death of the body, and they're like, "Well, you can't really describe it," and blah, 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 and we had these towels from the '70s, and, of course, everything in the early '70s had paisleys on it, and it had these paisleys, and I kinda looked at the paisley, I was like, "That I bet that's what a soul looks like," and I for some reason, that really stuck in my head. Every time I see a paisley, to me, it equates to a soul. I'm not exactly sure why. There's something psychedelic. You can kind of picture it having to do with consciousness or attached to the body or or something like that. So that's my soul. Do you have an idea, Chip, of soul when you what would your definition be?
Well, I love in your book. So the book is called. This is the new book, which is Soul Boom Workshop or Soul Boom Workbook, Spiritual Tools for Modern Living. So it's really taking your Soul Boom book and concept and making it even more practically applicable. You have a quote from George MacDonald, which is also attributed to C.S. Lewis, which is something to the effect of, "You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body." So let's like unpack that for a moment. You are a soul, you have a body. So my definition of soul speaks to this idea that we are a humble steward for and really the physical delivery vehicle for the soul through this lifetime. Our job is to help steward this soul that has incarnated in our body so that it can make it to its next body. We're just like a taxi vehicle. We're a taxi. We're an Uber. My body is an Uber, and my job is to really recognize that in my soul, I have the history of many other beings that have lived over the course of a long period of time, over maybe hundreds, thousands of years. So the soul is the thing that actually connects me to all of my lineage, and I don't mean blood lineage, like family necessarily, I just mean the lineage almost, on a more deeper spiritual level, and so soul for me is the idea of something that is actually human, but beyond human. It is the thing that actually connects us to all of the oneness of mankind going back to the history of mankind and into the future. So in some ways, we don't have a soul, we're being had by a soul. The soul has us in this lifetime, and our job is to steward that soul and learn from the soul because there's a lot of soul wisdom in there. So that's my long-winded answer. What do you think? Is that sort of stupid?
That's the most idiotic definition I've ever heard in my entire life. Get me out of this podcast. No, that's great. I mean, that's beautiful. I was riveted by everything you were saying. It just sparked so many thoughts. I mean, the first thing that it brought up for me was a quote that many people say, and is one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is from Father Teilhard de Chardin, who's a Jesuit priest and philosopher and whatnot. That we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I love that idea. And that goes hand in hand with what you're saying. And there's been a lot of work recently about like the difference between the brain and the mind. And I would even go one further and like say, what's the difference between the brain, the mind, consciousness, which is even kind of greater than the mind, and the soul, which is maybe even greater than consciousness? Like, where do you differentiate, those levels of literally being, as the being, consciousness, bliss?
So let's go back a few years. You grew up in a Baha'i family. Actually, by the way, I once helped create a Baha'i wedding at my first hotel, the Phoenix in San Francisco, with Michael Franti, the musician, and his wife, who's Persian and from the Baha'i faith. For those who don't understand or don't have history with the Baha'i faith, you grew up in a family with parents who were Baha'i? Did they become Baha'i, or were they born into the Baha'i faith? And what is the Baha'i faith? Like, what distinguishes it versus Christianity or any of the other religions?
So my parents became Baha'is in the 60s. A lot of people, they were pseudo hippies. They were faux hippies. They weren't like LSD tripping hippies, but they were bohemian hippies.
In Seattle? Where you're in Seattle, is that right?
Yeah, in Seattle. And a lot of people don't understand about that time is that there wasn't like one thing about like a hippie. It was a counterculture. Like there were political hippies and Marxist revolutionaries, and there were druggy hippies, and there were people just trying to get laid at concerts, and there were rock and roll hippies, and there were spiritual seekers and people on communes. And like the counterculture ran the gamut. And my dad was a painter. They lived on a houseboat in Seattle, and they were spiritual seekers and became members of the Baha'i faith. And this was during a time of great spiritual curiosity throughout the world that, frankly, I really miss. Cat Stevens became a Muslim. The guy from Apple um, lived on a Buddhist ashram.
Not Steve
Yeah, Steve
Jobs.
Jobs. Steve
Well,
Jobs.
okay,
That's why
okay.
was I blanking on his name? That's crazy.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he lived on an ashram. Like, Shirley MacLaine was like channeling ancient aliens and past lives. And
Shirley MacLaine's guru literally lives about 3 ranches down from us here at our ranch in Santa Fe. So, Chris Griscom, but keep going.
any sentence that starts with Shirley MacLaine's guru is one of my favorite sentences of all time. So people were exploring, is what I'm saying. They were, and even Christianity, even there were new ways of experiencing, the Bible. Hence, Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. And out of that milieu, my parents became Baha'is, and the Baha'i faith became very widespread in the West during that time. It originated in 19th century Persia. The prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, who went by the title of Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God, proclaimed himself to be the latest divine teacher in a long line of divine teachers. So Baha'is believe that there is one God, and that essentially all of the great spiritual religious leaders, from going way, way back to Abraham and Krishna and Moses and the Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad, that they're all revealing chapters of one book. There is only one religion. This is the religion of God. Baha'u'llah says eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And chapters are being revealed to humanity as we have the spiritual maturity to receive them. And it's all about, faith works on two levels, right? It works in your heart, and it's to give you meaning, hope, peace, serenity, increase compassion and kindness in our behavior. But religion slash faith and spiritual teaching also has an effect on humanity in its totality, to help move humanity forward in ever greater spiritual maturation. So, Baha'u'llah's teachings center a lot about on how humanity needs to find unity in this day and age, and we're seeing that now more than ever, that need for unity.
And you've talked about spiritual revolution, do you think there was a spiritual revolution in the '60s because you have some nostalgia for that period? What would a spiritual revolution look like today?
There was a kind of spiritual revolution that happened in the '60s and early '70s. I think it got muddied with a lot of, like, sex and drugs and rock and roll, frankly, and what started as a very pure spiritual revolution of, civil rights and war protest and seeking social justice and seeking greater meaning and kind of abandoning the constraints of a church that was too restraining and hypocritical, kind of became just hedonistic. So, and humans do that. We've done that from time immemorial. And what would a spiritual revolution look like? It's getting back to these eternal truths that have been with humanity from the beginning, that we are not separate from nature. We are connected to nature, that we are all one, we're connected to each other, that the divine courses through us, courses through nature, courses through our hearts, binds us all, that there's more to the world than just the material, and that compassion is key. There's more components, prayer and meditation, there's, virtues and morality, but these tools can help us kind of create a society, a richer, deeper, more meaningful society, like literally to socialize us with these spiritual tools to make a more just, kind, and loving world. And I'll go back to the 60s again, I was born in 66, so I was only a little kid, but in the 70s, I remember us talking about world peace. And now if you talk about world peace, oh my God, you're laughed at, scorned, reviled, eye roll. Humans will never have peace. We're too aggressive. And, I do believe that not peace is not, Chip, is not just an end to war. Peace is a transformation on how we interact with ourselves and Mother Earth and with each other. It's loving, compassionate service one to another in building community. And I think we can get there. I think we will get there. And maybe a painful process of birth to get there. But I don't think you need to be a Baha'i to be a part of a spiritual revolution. I think we include Christians and agnostics and Hindus and spiritual but not religious folk all working together. But it's raising up this kind of consciousness.
I'm a thoughtfulist. That's my religion. I'm a thoughtfulism is my religion. I really believe in the idea of thinking is a good thing as opposed to just belief alone. I think you have to think things through, but most importantly, I think just being thoughtful to other people. So my religion has become thoughtfulism. I will just say the following. You in your 20s, I think you went through maybe a dark night of the soul, or a period of time where you got reacquainted maybe with what was important in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about your early adulthood and how your Baha'i faith became reignited? And and then how can you be both Dwight and, you know, this Baha'i believer?
Yeah.
Obviously you can.
I talk about this in the preceding book, Soul Boom, which is like the fundamental question, why the hell is the guy who played Dwight talking to us about spirituality? Because it is a strange disconnect. And it's funny, I did a podcast recently I was talking to the woman and her about her raising a family, and I was like, "Well, do you pray with your children?" And she was like, "Boy, I did not see this on my dance card that Dwight Schrute would be asking me to pray with my kids." So I grew up a Baha'i, which was a wonderful, foundation of kind of peace, love, unity, cohesion, mission, life, purpose, awe, wonder, service, and left it in my 20s, and I wanted to be an actor in New York City. I wanted to be a bohemian, and I didn't want morality in my life. I didn't wanna be thinking about, not having sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my life, and that was great until it wasn't, and I had a lot of mental health issues, in my 20s, a lot of anxiety, depression, disconnection, addiction, and because it was the '90s, there wasn't therapy. I didn't know anyone who went to therapy. That's for, rich people on the Upper East Side. And the only thing I knew to do to get out of kind of this kind of misery that I was in was to read spiritual texts. And, Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, which is one of the most important books I think ever written, she had a quote somewhere that said, "I come to spirituality not out of virtue, but out of necessity." And for me, my spiritual path was kind of grounded on the necessity that I needed a handhold. I needed something to ground my life in meaning and stuff to do, like meditation, like prayer, like reading holy texts, like deep contemplation and thinking about kind of the totality of my life in terms of meaning. So it's not like, oh, I found God and then my life got better. It's been a long, slow process from my mid-20s to now in my late 50s to explore this stuff, and it was necessary for me, and then it's just been really interesting as well. I love to study other faith traditions, and I read Buddhism pretty much every day and, you know, go to meditation retreats and I love studying the world of faith. I love reading the Bible, and, this is just kind of part of my journey, and along the way, I did a lot of acting, and I stumbled into playing this character, Dwight Schrute, and that was pretty awesome.
How did you stumble into that particular role, which in many ways was the role that made you a household word?
I went to theater school, and I spent 10 years doing theater, and in theater, you just play different characters. It's like, "Oh, now I'm doing a farce. Oh, now I'm doing a Eugene O'Neill family tragedy. Oh, now I'm doing Shakespeare in the Park. Now I'm doing an improv show." And I spent 10 years just playing characters. That's what you train to do in the theater. It wasn't like, "Oh, I'm a sitcom actor or I'm a stand-up comic or I'm a dramatic actor or something like that." And then I went out to LA and I started playing different kinds of roles. And of course, I always had a little more success in comedy because I have a fat, weird face and, you know, a weird mind. And I could improvise pretty well. I was pretty quick on my feet. So, you know, doors opened in comedy. But I was on a show called 6 Feet Under before I did The Office that had some quirky comedy in it, but it was not a comedy by any means. And and then because of the success of that show, I got to be on The Office. I auditioned, and the showrunner, Greg Daniels, had seen me in 6 Feet Under and liked me on that show. And I, I have a bunch of kind of crazy white trash weirdo relatives from Washington State and Wisconsin and in Minnesota, and I knew the world of the Schrutes pretty damn well, and I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons, and my friends drove muscle cars, and it just was in my DNA.
What was it like? And so you took on that role at what age? How long ago was this when you started The Office?
That's what's crazy is I started playing Dwight at like 39.
20 years ago.
Fame came to me in my 40s, quite
Yeah.
late, which is a little weird. And I'm grateful. I don't know that I could have handled it in my 20s. I think it would have made my head explode.
How was that in your 40s? Again, 40s are sort of like the early part of midlife. What were your 40s like? Because we call this show the Midlife Chrysalis, partly because we believe that midlife doesn't have to be a crisis. It can actually be this transformative time where we liquefy part of who we are in the spirit of saying, my God, the second half of my adult life might be better than the first. So, what were your 40s like all of a sudden becoming famous while also being it's hard as an actor when people see you only as that character. And if you're out having dinner in LA and people come up to you and ask for an autograph and a photo, you feel like you have to play the character. What's that? What is that life like? I'd love to hear it.
Those are two different but connected questions. I mean, before I did 6 Feet Under, right before The Office, we were so broke, I was paying my rent on my credit card. That's me at like 37. And I student loans still not paid off and just trying to make it as an actor in LA. I was getting some film and TV work, which is a little more lucrative. And so I kind of thought, oh, keep rolling the dice. Maybe it's going to hit one of these days. But I kind of feel like all of the work that I did as an actor in the theater in the previous decade and decade and a half prepared me to play Dwight, you know? I could create characters. I had done a bunch of clowning. I kind of had a confidence in my late 30s, early 40s that I didn't have previous. So it's like my whole life prepared me for that. And but not only did I get to play Dwight, like then the doors opened for movies and appearances and talk shows and commercial campaigns and then all of a sudden we had a lot of money. And as you know, there are if you look in the list of like the biggest stressors in life, there, death in the family, divorce, moving, but coming into money is top 5. And we moved, had a baby, and came into a lot of money at the same time. And this was all around 2004, 5, 6. And it was an incredibly challenging time. And from a spiritual perspective, it was incredible test of the ego too, and certainly a test of our marriage. And 'cause I've been married 30 years now to my wonderful wife, Holiday Reinhorn, shout out, who's a fiction writer, a brilliant fiction writer. And it was a crazy time. But then I was also starring in movies, and getting to travel the world and so here's this kind of broke theater actor, who just a few years previous was doing Eugene O'Neill for $700 a week, making millions of dollars. And that was its own test in a way. It was its own test. And then, yeah, post The Office, the last 10, 11 years, let's say the last 15 years, it's a real challenge to just be known as one character. I'll go down the street and people will be like, "Hey, Dwight," as if like, as if I am Dwight Schrute. Like, do you not understand that's a character that I play? It's the strangest thing to me that someone would ever, like, see a see a you know, see a character and Julia Louis-Dreyfus is walking down the street and you're like, "Hey, Elaine." Like, it's, but I'm grateful for it, and it's a challenge. I'm grateful for all the doors that it's opened. I get to, let's be real, Chip. I don't know if folks would have wanted to if a publishing company would have wanted to publish a book on spirituality unless it was written by a celebrity who could promote it and people would be kind of interested because a celebrity wrote it. It's hard to get books on spirituality published, even by top spiritual thought leaders. So it's opened so many doors to travel, to other work. But I wish that folks would see me a little bit more as the totality of my work as an actor from theater to all the film and television that I've done before The Office, after The Office. But at the end of the day, it'll probably on my tombstone, it'll be like the guy who played Dwight, you know, and that's okay too.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. So did it deepen your faith as a result? I mean, you could make an argument that maybe the Hollywood life, which can be very superficial and very egocentric, you might actually need the balance of this investment in soul and your faith and your devotion in order to have harmony. Is that accurate?
It is absolutely accurate. There are many corrupt industries. I worked for a short time in New York City in the insurance brokerage industry, and boy, that was a crazy corrupt world. But Hollywood trades on ego, and ego is very dangerous for all of us. In fact, in the Baha'i faith, the leader of the Baha'i faith was asked if the Baha'is believed in Satan, and he said, "Yes." And the person was really surprised, like, "Oh, you do? You believe in Satan?" He said, "Yes, Satan is the insistent self." And I love that idea, and that's the battle of ego. That's in every faith tradition, right? That's a key component of Hindu and Buddhism, and Hollywood feeds on ego. It's like, who likes me? Who doesn't? Picture what it's like, Chip, for an insecure, offbeat, actor who hasn't had a whole lot of success, but has barely been getting his bills paid. And then you play Dwight for a year or two, and you're walking down the street, and people come up to you all the time, and they're like, "I love you. I love you." It's like, they don't love me. They don't know me. They respond positively to a character that I play on a TV show. But it's so easy to get it confused. Like, oh, it's like the Sally Fields, "You love me, you really love me." But that's the whole business works on that. Like, how much are you loved and how much is that worth? Oh, this movie star, Leonardo DiCaprio, is both loved and talented, and he's worth X at the box office. So I'm gonna stick a dollar amount on how much you're loved. And if you're fading, if your star is fading, you're not worth any dollars, but you're moderately loved. Like, there's this weird, like, commerce, love, ego, narcissism dance in Hollywood that is, really, toxic.
One of my metaphors to think about the ego and the soul, and I described this at MEA, Modern Elder Academy, our 2 campuses in Baja and Santa Fe, is the idea that when you're young, it's like ballroom dancing, and the ego's leading the dance. So in 6th grade, I went to ballroom dancing, and as the boy, I learned how to lead the girl, and she was in heels and going backwards, and the ego's leading the dance. But around midlife, the dance shifts, and the soul is leading the dance. If you really are living a fully actualized life, Richard Rohr, who's a MEA faculty member, famous Christian mystic Catholic priest, says that the primary operating system for the first half of the life is our ego, and then for the second half, it's our soul, but nobody gave us any operating instructions of how to drive the soul. So in the second half of our life, the soul is leading the dance, and the ego is having to learn how to go backwards in heels. And to my mind, the humor in that, the humor in sort of seeing that the ego has to have humility, it has to actually be able to laugh at oneself. It has to be able to do something that's awkward and a beginner, and that is it's not that the ego goes away, it's not like we're trying to actually say it's like more no, the ego still is there, we are an individuated person. What the ego does for us, but it is time for us to let the soul lead the dance and surrender, which is not easy, to actually seeing where this soul's gonna take us. I as someone who likes to be in control, I know that that's a tough one. Does that resonate with you at all?
I think that's really staggeringly brilliant. I love that. I'm really deeply pondering that idea, and it's beautiful. For me, every once in a while, the ego wants to take the dance back, and it's kinda like, "Fuck you, I've got this," and it just doesn't work as well when you're older. It might work when you're 27 or 34, but it doesn't at 59. So, it really resonates, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal that, frankly.
So, let's talk about devotion. I mean, faith is something that over the course of our life, we have devotion to all kinds of things. The devotion could be to, sports betting. The devotion could be to alcohol. The devotion could be to watching Netflix and being, very steeped in the entertainment industry as a viewer. But I also think one of the things that is interesting as we get older is this idea of being devoted to something beyond yourself. I've been really fortunate in my life to go out and go to all kinds of devotional ceremonies. The Mevlana Whirling Dervish Festival devoted to Rumi, who was the first whirling dervish in Konya, Turkey, an Islamic festival. The Maha Kumbh Mela, the 100 million people at the Ganges River for the Hindus, and all kinds of other devotional festivals. Is there a devotional festival for Baha'is? And have you ever what how does your devotion to your faith express itself in a collective way as opposed to just in an individual way, in that sort of collective effervescence?
I love what you're saying. You know, I would go very, very similar to how you started. I would say we all have our forms of devotion, but I would say that we all worship something. Humans are wired to worship. And there may be an atheist listening right now. It's like, well, I don't. It's like, well, but if you don't worship a higher power, then you worship yourself or your own thought process, or perhaps you just worship your family or worship your culture or worship your political party.
Worship the mind? I mean, a lot of atheists and agnostics are pretty intellectual.
And there's nothing wrong with science. It's obviously a beautiful expression of reality. And but yeah, devotion is interesting because then I don't know what the root word is, but as you were saying that, I was thinking about like devout, like people who are devout have devotions, or a devoted husband. You're devoted to something. For me, to quote MC Hammer, you got to pray just to make it today. I I think that one of the disconnects we have in the modern world is between prayer and meditation. So you have a lot of people in blue states that meditate and don't pray. Because for them, prayer is like daddy God, patriarchal God, old white man with a beard, what I had to do when I was a kid. They have religious trauma. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, Father who art in heaven. Like, that's bullshit. I don't want anything to do with that. But I find great solace in meditation, which can have its own kind of devotional aspect to it. And then you have a lot of Americans who pray and don't meditate, you know? They have no problem saying, "Oh, Father," or "Oh, Jesus," or whatever, but they don't kind of take the time for deep contemplation. So, in the Baha'i faith, we say a prayer every day, kind of like the Muslims pray 5 times a day, we pray once a day, and it's a very short, simple prayer, and it goes, "I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth, that there is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting." So Baha'is say that prayer every day, facing where the Baha'i Holy Land is in Israel, Palestine, in Haifa, Israel, where the prophet founder is buried. And one of the reasons I love this prayer is it's got the meaning of life baked into it. We have been created to know and worship God. Now, before you gasp and clutch your pearls, listeners, and go, "Blah," well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that we get down on our knees and we genuflect to sky daddy, God, bearded man in the sky. What is it to know and worship God? To know and worship God is to know science, because science is an expression of how physical reality works. To worship God is to be of service to others, is to live in kindness and humility and in making the world a better place and improving ourselves. To know God is to know thyself. That's in the Quran. To know God is to know thyself, because we are all divine beings. We're filled with the stuff of the divine, the spiritual qualities. So one this is a way that this devotion anchors me, is in saying that prayer. I'm reminded of why I'm here. I get lost, my rudder gets confused. Oh, I'm here to know and worship God. What does that mean? How do I move that forward? And by the way, knowing and worshiping God may mean being on a TV sitcom, and it may mean being an accountant and providing for your family and providing great accounting services. And it might mean staying at home and raising children. Like, this is not, some grandiose thing. This is like it's finding your truest and most honest and humble purpose.
I have 2 last questions. One, let's go back to the workbook. The Soul Boom workbook, came out this week. It's available, wherever you buy books. If there was a basic summary for why this book is valuable right now for people, how would you summarize it?
Well, I referenced The Artist's Way, which is a workbook for finding your path as an artist and, tapping into the artist within all of us. Accountants can use that book and have a richer, more meaningful life. And the Soul Boom workbook, oh, look, I happen to have a copy right here. Spiritual Tools for Modern Living. I'm gonna sound arrogant here, forgive me, I'm sorry, everyone, but I think there's not a more important book right now for the way the world is in, because this book, and it's not like my writing or anything like that, but what the book does is it takes you through a spiritual journey. Like, what is sacred? What is the soul? How can we use spiritual tools for mental health and anxiety? How can we deeply connect with nature? How can we build community? How do we deal with tests and difficulties? How do we frame death and dying from a spiritual perspective? And it's writing exercises, drawing, inspirational quotes, activities to just help one along. It would be great to do with a family. It'd be great to do with a book club. It'd be great to do in a church basement.
It'd be great to do at an MEA workshop someday, my friend. I mean, honestly, this workbook is made for a workshop. It is so I got an early copy and I was able to read it, and I was struck by how similar what you're doing today is to what I'm doing, and I love this, and the fact that part of what we're really trying to do is one of the things I say I do, I say I make love for a living. My job is to really help people to understand how to feel love, the universality of love in the context of a time where it's easy to not feel love. And this book is it's so simple and so profound at the same time. So thank you. I mean, it's a spectacular book. And did your publisher say, Soul Boom was a great book? You've got a great podcast named Soul Boom. It's time for a workbook, or was this your idea or your co-author's idea?
One thing that happens when you write a book is there's all of these like cheap imitation workbooks that pop up on Amazon.
So true. What the hell is that? I know it's true.
That's where I got the idea, is from these jackasses who are trying to like ride on my coattails, because I worked my butt off on the Soul Boom original book. And then immediately, like within a month, there were like 5 Soul Boom workbooks. And people were writing and they're like, "Hey, I ordered this workbook, but it wasn't very good. It just had a bunch of Xeroxed pages in it." And I was like, "Ah." But I was like, "But that is a great idea. This is a book that could use a companion book." And there was a cry from people for like, "Okay, these are great ideas in your book, but how do we put them into practice? How do I put it into practice in my life?" And I was hearing that from born again Christians and from agnostics. And so that's where it came out of it. And then, you know, I, um, I have to write another book next year, Chip, and I need your help. Will you help me on my next book?
Yeah, I will. What's it going to be about?
Can I interview you for it?
Yes, please.
It's,
Interview me
it's,
for your podcast. I'll come on your podcast. You're on my
yep, I would
podcast.
love to have you on the podcast,
Yeah.
and I
Okay.
would love to. My next book is on the meaning of life.
Oh,
Just a
only
little,
that.
just a little, but, our mutual friend Arthur Brooks, and I'm gonna be hopefully I can interview, Father Richard Rohr and, some other folks. There's gonna be interviews and activities and some essays and a little comedy along the way, but so this is a
As well as
bridge
our
between Soul
mutual
Boom.
friend, Rich Roll, who had his birthday yesterday or today, I think, 59th
Oh,
birthday. You guys are the same age, just about.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, he's such a great guy.
Okay, so last question, is, Let's talk about wisdom for a moment. You've learned, often the school of hard knocks is what leads to our wisdom, and our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. Let's say a young person came to you, doesn't have to be an actor, could be anybody, and they came to you and said, like, hey, Rain, I would love to have some coffee or tea with you next week, and I'd love to have you come to our meeting and come with a bumper sticker, not a physical one, but just a mental one. A bumper sticker that defines a piece of wisdom you've learned along the way. And what's the origin story behind that bumper sticker? How did you learn that lesson? And so what would you say might be just, I know it's hard to have just one, but back in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of bumper stickers. Remember? A lot of bumper stickers. So what would be the Rainn Wilson bumper sticker that comes from the School of Hard Knocks?
This may sound a little simplistic, but I got to go with Arthur Brooks to go meet the Dalai Lama last year, and Rich Roll was there. It was really a beautiful meeting, and Dr. Lisa Miller, do you know her?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Yeah, I got to interview a monk that had lived his entire life in the monastery and studied Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And I was thinking about this book that I had to write, and I was like, "What's the meaning of life?" I was like, "Pretend." This is a similar question you're asking. I'm like, "Pretend I'm a guy. You've been sitting up in a cave for 20 years, and I'm clambering up the mountain, like one of those New Yorker cartoons, and I'm just at your feet, and I'm like, 'Oh, master, what is the meaning of life? Like, what would you say is the meaning of life?'" And he thought for a minute, and he was like, "It's very simple. It's service. It's service to others, because when you give service to others, it actually makes you happier. So it actually helps you and it helps them. And if everyone is living in a service mindset, you're keeping your ego, the insistent self or Satan, in check. And if everyone was living in a service oriented mindset, the world would transform. If everyone was thinking, how can I take what I have and use it to help others and help make the world a better place? This is this would be a viral transformation of the planet. So that's what I would say to a young actor, student, someone just like, how can you take what you do well, what you love, what ignites your heart and turn it into service in some way, shape, or form? Even if you're, an insurance agent and you wanna just provide the best insurance for people possible, but to truly believe that and live in that kind of on that kind of path.
What a beautiful answer. And I'm going to quote Rabindranath Tagore, who said, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. That was a quote I would use within my boutique hotel company that I ran for 24 years because the name of the company was called Joie de Vivre and it was about joy. And really, if we can get to the place where we see service as joy, that's miraculous and magical. You have been miraculous and magical. I look forward to hanging out with you, whether it's on your
Great.
podcast or doing a workshop with you or like, listen, helping you with your book. Thank you for being who you are, Rain. I mean, it really is. You help us to see that we as humans are a lot more complex and we have many more layers to ourselves than than you know than what is obvious. You can't judge a book by its cover.
Indeed. I love what you're doing, the service you're providing, and, I'm a modern elder. I need to get my ass over to that academy. And, would love to have you on the Soul Boom podcast, really, and I'll connect you with our producers and get that make that happen, and hopefully we can hang out sometime in person and high five.
We'll do that. We'll do that. Thank you so much. Well, that was a nourishing conversation. I don't know about you. I really appreciated the depth of our friend Rainn Wilson. He's so different than the Dwight character he played on The Office. And that's probably my first takeaway from this session is that, we're a lot more layered than we necessarily come across. And Rain is an exceptional example of that. Number two is I think the discussion about what it was like to be in his 40s and all of a sudden be an overnight success, having toiled away to prepare for it, and all of a sudden it happened for him. And the fact that people would, see him on the street and call him Dwight, and how he could have sort of spun out of control. I mean, there are, people like Whitney Houston and Anthony Bourdain and a variety of other well-known actors and celebrities who at some point end up taking their own lives or doing a lot of drugs because in some ways they are trying to divorce themselves from the identity the world sees. There's a beautiful poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If," and I'm gonna just quote a portion of it here because it really reminded me of what I was hearing from Rain on our, interview. This is just a portion of "If." "If you can dream and not make your dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same." So this idea that, you can have triumph, you can have disaster, neither one should define you. And in I think Rain's case, what it spoke to was this idea that the more fame he was finding in his life, the more he needed to devote himself to his soulful spiritual journey, which ultimately has led to Soul Boom, the book, the podcast, and now the workbook. I think my final takeaway is just the quoting. He seems to be a big fan of Julia Cameron, who is, based here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and The Artist's Way. And he talked about the importance of spirituality not just being a virtue, but it being a necessity. And for him in his 20s, when he was sort of spinning out of control, having a challenging time, the fact that spirituality, his Baha'i faith from his childhood, came back into his life and started to become a foundational part of his 30s, such that when he did get that fame that came 20 years ago, at around 39 years old, he was prepared for it because he had something to undergird it with, like a foundation. His spirituality was his foundation, and the necessity of, maybe a little bit of intuition or his soul seeing this is where you're gonna be going. We need to reacquaint you with some foundational spiritual practice so that you can go through this time and have that kind of balance. Might have been an essential part of why he's at a stage in his life where he's, profoundly happy and feels really good about his life and is devoting his life to the meaning of life, which is his next book, which I'm excited to collaborate with him on. I hope this was, a nutritious and fun swim in the deep end of the pool. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.